Thanks everyone for joining us at our 5th annual learning event for the Mercy Corps AgriFin programs. This is the closing plenary on leaning into climate solutions. And for those of you who've been with us all week, I think you've probably already seen a couple of very good sessions that that we've held on moonshot climate solutions and also on different climate approaches and climate data. Earlier today, John Mundy from our team introduced our new climate strategy and noted that although this program wasn't originally designed 6 years ago to address the effects of climate change on farmers, particularly over the last 2 years, we have seen our partners and their farmers really being affected by drought, pest, disease, flood in an increasing way. Our insurance partners, our banking partners, our market partners are all reaching out and saying, that they need to find solutions, that we've got to help farmers adapt where we can. We've got to help farmers mitigate the effects of climate change. So we're extremely happy that we're going to have an aggressive climate focus in the next 4 years of AgriFin. And so this closing plenary, the last 6 years of AgriFin, is also our opening plenary for the next 4 years of AgriFin, leaning into climate change. And so I think I'll go ahead with no more ado and kick off with our plenary speakers. We're very fortunate to have 2 groups of great plenary speakers today. And after those plenary addresses, we'll be moving into an expert panel that looks at investors and government approach and tech innovator approach. And really kind of how we can all as an ecosystem make a difference and make a difference fast. And then we'll wrap up. So thank you guys for being part of this journey with us this week. And we're excited about the discussion this evening in Africa or this morning in the United States and in between. So let me please go ahead and introduce our first 2 speakers. First, I'd like to introduce Stuart Collis. Stuart Collis is a senior program officer at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation focused on digital agriculture solutions. We've been very privileged to be working with Stuart for the last 2 years on AgriFin with the Gates Foundation. But Stuart has over 20 years of experience in agricultural innovation technology. He has a degree, I did not know this until today, in geomatic engineering, and has worked with CGIAR and Texas A&M before going on to co-found Aware, which many of you may know about, but is a leading solution on agricultural intelligence, information, and insight. Definitely, you can see the footprint of Aware across Africa now. At the Gates Foundation, his focus is on the digital farmer services and smart farming solutions. And Stuart is going to be talking to us about the Gates Foundation vision into climate change and climate tech, but he's also going to be delivering a taped address, a taped message from Bill Gates. And I have never introduced Bill Gates at a conference before, and I might never do it again. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce a man who needs no introduction, but just for the fun of it. Bill Gates is a technologist, business leader, and philanthropist. As you all know, Bill co-founded Microsoft Corporation in 1975 with Paul Allen and led the company to be what it is today. In 1994, Bill and Melinda Gates transferred $20 billion of Microsoft stock to their foundation, making it the largest of its kind in the world. And in 2008, Bill transitioned to focus full-time on the foundation work. And I think a lot of the amazing experience that we've had working with the foundation is a direct vision of Bill and Melinda's engagement in agriculture and their commitment to supporting smallholder farmers. But I think what's also interesting about Bill is that in 2021, he published a book that you may have heard of, How to Avoid a Climate Disaster. And in that book, he presents his learnings from the last 10 years of investing in climate smart solutions and his recommendations moving forward. So his comments that we'll hear tonight or this morning for you, Stuart, are linked to his forthcoming book or his new book. And with no more ado, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Stuart and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
Great, thank you, Lisa. I appreciate the introduction. Let me just start off with a short video that Bill put together around climate change impacts and adaptation regarding small-scale producers. Climate adaptation is an area we've been looking at within the Agriculture Development Program at the Foundation to understand what could we be doing that's more intentional around climate and climate adaptation particularly. So let me just share my screen and we can start off with a short video from Bill.
Tragically, billions of people who are least responsible for greenhouse gas emissions will suffer the most from climate change. Imagine you're a farmer in Kenya. You work a 2-acre farm to feed your family. You produce approximately 55 times less carbon than the average American. But now suddenly you're dealing with drought or flash floods or locusts. Even if there isn't a catastrophic event, the land you rely on is producing less, and you are already on the edge of survival. Worldwide, there are 500 million smallholder farms like this. In many low-income countries, more than half the population works in agriculture. So when small farms fail, whole economies fail. And that means more poverty, hunger, and hardship. That's why it's so important that we make agriculture more resilient. We need innovations like crops that are resistant to drought, disease, pests, and weeds, digital tools that get farmers the information they need to adjust to changing conditions, financial services from insurance to credit to protect farmers from catastrophic loss. If we're serious about addressing climate change, we have to invest aggressively in 2 goals. First, advancing the technology and policies to get to net zero emissions by 2050. Second, protecting the livelihoods of families in danger of losing them to an already rapidly changing climate. That's how we avoid a climate disaster.
So hopefully from that, you can see that in addition to addressing climate mitigation, we also recognize that climate change is here. That adaptation is critical to our outcome goals at the Gates Foundation. By way of introduction, I'd like to just sort of give a little bit of overview of the Agriculture Development Program that we're focused on country-led inclusive agricultural transformation. So this means that we're seeking to help small-scale crop and livestock producers transition from subsistence farming to small commercial enterprises and become contributors to economic growth. As Bill mentioned, with over 50% of the population in many low and middle income countries involved in agriculture, this sort of transition can have a huge impact on the overall status of global development in general. And so the way we look at agriculture is we anchor on 4 key impact indicators. One is increasing agricultural productivity for small-scale crop and livestock producers. 2 is increasing small-scale producer household incomes. 3, increasing the consumption of safe, affordable, nutritious diets year-round. And 4, increasing women's empowerment in agriculture. Now, as we all know, COVID has caused severe setbacks for these goals and other sustainable development goals. The world was already off track in terms of SDG 2s, but will now be further off track, with current trends estimating 840 million people hungry in 2030. There's an additional 80 million people projected to be undernourished and 14% increase in child wasting. The UN projections of the global number of acutely food insecure are double what they were last year. And this is going to increase humanitarian food assistance needs. There's also been, as many of you know, disruptions to trade, supply chains, field operations, and all this within the context of competition for fewer international assistance and domestic resources. Even if we just look at pricing, for example, in terms of this shock, it's estimated that COVID-19 has contributed almost 20% to food inflation. And while this volatility is within the range of sort of, the normal range, it still demonstrates the impact such shocks can have on our food systems. So as we turn to face the climate challenge, we see similarly impactful shocks ahead. These can be in the form of extreme events, as we've seen in Kenya with hundreds of thousands of animals impacted in northern Kenya due to drought, or it could be due to flooding, such as we saw with Hurricane Ida in Zimbabwe. But more challenging is when we look at some of the gradual changes. So we have the extreme events, but these gradual changes will impact agroecologies. We see shorter seasons, we see more variable rainfall. The average might be the same, but it may come in heavier amounts at certain times of the season. Changing temperatures impact the ability of crops and livestock to be suitable to that agroecology. So the chart here shows the changes in the bulk season rainfall for Eastern Ethiopia from 1920 to 2020. So you can see the remarkable difference to what has been experienced in the past. And that not only affects crops and livestock, but also increases the severity of pests and diseases. Sometimes they're migrating to entirely new areas where the environment hasn't been suitable for them before. And I know the Mercy Corps team was involved in mobilizing a lot of partners using digital channels with FAO and the national government to track and treat locust outbreaks in Kenya recently. And this is just one example of where digital systems can help minimize risk and support mitigation action. So just what are some of the other solutions that we think about at the foundation and more broadly in the agricultural development community on how to address climate risk? So as many of you know, the foundation has done a lot of research into crops and livestock, varietal development, breed development, looking into best practices. And we'll continue to do this work as we develop drought-tolerant varieties, flood-resistant varieties, looking into vaccines for vector-borne diseases that are occurring in geographies they maybe didn't before, and so forth. When we look into other areas, predictive action, predictive modeling for early action is another area. We've done some work in pest disease that was related to the locust outbreak work example I showed earlier, but also looking into how do we get ahead of these pending risks as soon as possible? And there's a lot of people working on this in different platforms around the world, World Food Program, FAO, World Bank, etc., the famine early warning system, but just trying to do a better job of predicting as best as possible what these risks are and when they'll be coming. Another area that a lot of people are looking at is water management. So as we see water in the early example of Ethiopia, where it becomes a more and more precious resource, especially in rain-fed agriculture, looking at water resource management, and not just at the farm level, but looking at this from a policy perspective and a landscape level. So how do we enable decision makers with the right tools to be able to manage these types of resources at these national and landscape levels? And then finally, when we look at the challenge of agroecological zones shifting and environmental conditions changing, our ability to find new crop varieties and livestock breeds that can adapt may be limited to some degree. So then you have to start looking at diversification. So how do we assess other value chains, other commodities? Of course, this involves a whole lot of questions around infrastructure and markets, access to markets, and support for that value chain in that particular geography, but certainly something that we need to be considering. Then as we turn to digital and data tools, how can these help us? Well, you've seen many examples over the course of the last few days of people using Earth observation and remote sensing. That could be for detecting rainfall rates through satellite. It could be greenness indices through satellites or drones or fixed wing aircraft and hyperspectral imagery. We're seeing more and more of these types of observations becoming available and at higher repeat rates, so meaning that we get images every day instead of every 10 days. This really helps in agriculture, given that we need to monitor plants constantly throughout the season. We also have sensors, and these are becoming more capable, more robust, lower cost. And while perhaps they're not quite ready to put a sensor in every smallholder farmer field, these can still be leveraged for crop trials and research and extrapolation using spatial modeling across the landscape from these data points. In order to do that, of course, you've got to have great analytics, and we have artificial intelligence tools and machine learning algorithms that can really help us leverage that data to come up with better predictions. This example is using artificial intelligence to immediately identify a pest or disease and then provide a recommendation for how to deal with that. But some of these technologies can also help us run compute-intensive algorithms that previously you needed a high-performance computing center to do that, but now we can just run it in a cloud, distributed cloud system. So a lot more capability that we can leverage. But it's not just about the algorithms and the data alone. It's about how do we manage that data. So as we're collecting data through imagery, sensors, social media platforms, financial transactions, how do we break down the data silos? How do we leverage that data for various applications? Who owns the data? Who hosts the data? What are the ag data platforms to manage it? What are the government policies around data? And how do we make systems more interoperable through open APIs so that there's more data fluidity throughout the system so that we can leverage that information? This is really important for providing very tailored services to small-scale producers. And then finally, digital tools. And a lot of the focus of this conference around these types of tools. But mobile phones are really, really game-changing in terms of our ability to interact with farmers and their ability to use apps or IVR systems, SMS, chatbots, WhatsApp, Facebook, etc. This two-way flow of information, especially on the latter tools, is really important, again, to be able to provide more tailored services to small-scale producers. There's, of course, many, many solutions out there, as we've seen in the Digitalization of African Agriculture report a couple of years ago, and we're increasingly tracking this sort of information more real time. And this is fantastic to see, but we are challenged in that not a lot of solutions have really reached the scale that we need to reach. The Mercy Corps team have done some great work with the GIZ team on understanding some of the drivers of what the scale of these platforms could be. But we still have a long way to go, with only 13% of small-scale producers ever registering for a service, and even a few are actively using them. We certainly see on the upside that bundling these services together, and this makes sense, is there's a multiplier effect by combining different services together. So we see these solutions reinforce one another. If you're going to provide credit, if you had advisory as well as part of that package, then you sort of increase the chances of repayments and so forth. The question remains, how do we focus these solutions to address the new challenges we'll face around climate change and climate adaptation? So just a note on some of the areas that we've been looking at within the Digital Farmer Services team at the Foundation. These are three areas we work on already, but just to give a little bit of a climate adaptation blend to each of them. When we look at soil health and agronomy, this is really key to enabling farmers with the right techniques and tools to be able to be more resilient. So using statistical techniques and models to prescribe interventions for small-scale producers. These might be things like increasing soil organic matter, increasing carbon rooting depth, better soil retention, all of this to increase yield stability and greater resilience to changes in temperature and rainfall. So basically, healthy plants are more resilient to some of these shocks. The second area is around digital climate-informed advisory services. And so the Global Commission for Adaptation will be releasing a blueprint on this topic. But these enable more tailored, timely, relevant information to be delivered to farmers if you sort of build out the whole system to support not just weather forecasts, but tying that weather data and other Earth observation data to advisory services or advisory content. So for example, a seasonal outlook, when communicated in the right way, can result in better decisions about crop selection and destocking decisions. So turning it into an economic decision, not just a piece of information. The Series 2030 report this year showed that extension and information is key to the successful adoption of climate smart varieties, breeds, and practices. So really important for our climate adaptation work. And then lastly, on the area of risk mitigation, in the absence of appropriate and affordable risk management tools, small-scale producers have very limited capacity to sustainably cope. And a lot of studies have shown that small-scale producers adopt a more precautionary coping mechanisms with increased risk, leading to underinvestment and less adoption of productivity-enhancing technologies. So over the last decade, we've seen some really interesting solutions around index insurance that have shown promise. Pula is an example of that. And this enables small-scale producers to better manage the impacts of climate events and become more resilient and recover more quickly from some of those shocks. So I'll close with looking at the broader digital agriculture system. So as I said earlier, a lot of the solutions out there haven't really scaled. And so one thing we've been doing is looking at the sort of national level systems. And we think about it in these three ways: is looking at farmer-facing solutions, so the apps, the services that farmers or other value chain actors interact with. The second area is around the ecosystem. And so this is where the Mercy Corps AgriFin team and program is really strong, is how do we strengthen that ecosystem? How do we provide more services, higher quality services, help those services scale? And that includes data, content, some of the global public good assets that are required to support those systems. And then finally, looking at the macro level, enabling environments, so government policies around data sharing, consumer protection, infrastructure, investments, and so forth. We've been doing some work around breaking these down and tying these up to our impact goals that I mentioned earlier. Looking at the different types of users that are interacting with these systems, the different types of solutions. But the really important part is this digital stack and how that fits together, and where we feel that philanthropic investment or other types of investment is best placed to support this infrastructure. We've done an assessment across 14 different countries to look at this infrastructure framework and figure out what the right types of investments at the right time are. So I'll close with just a final thought on innovation. As Bill mentions a lot, innovation is really key to solving a lot of these challenges. And he has a great quote in his recent book around the definition of innovation. A lot of people think that innovation is more about the invention side, but really what he's saying is it's more about the processes around it. It's about coming up with new approaches, new business models, supply chains, markets, and policies that help take these inventions and bring them to life to reach global scale. It's both a new way of building those, inventing those devices, but it's also a new way of doing things. So I'd like to leave everybody with that challenge in mind as we move forward to address climate adaptation. I wanted to thank the Mercy Corps team and the AgriFin team, as always, putting on a great event, but also for the last 2 years working with us on this program. Additional thanks to the MasterCard Foundation, who supported the Mercy Corps team before that, GIZ, who've been doing some work with the AgriFin program, and Bayer Foundation, who are starting their support this year. At the Gates Foundation, we look forward to co-designing the next phase of the AgriFin Digital Farmer program. And finally, I'd like to thank all of you, the community who work with the AgriFin team, but just more broadly in this sector, who I know are working very hard every day to make a difference in the lives of small-scale producers and help us meet the challenge of adapting to a new climate. So over to you, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Stuart. It's really it's really wonderful to be working with a foundation that is this thoughtful and brings this type of expertise. to the field. And I know from John Mundy's presentation on our climate strategy this morning, one thing that we've noticed is that the pilots that we've been supporting bringing farmer-facing organizations and climate smart solutions are complex. They're special, and so it's great to see those final words from Bill Gates. And we definitely realize that this is just as much about the business model and farmer adoption as it is about figuring out the tech. I'd like to go ahead and transition to our next and last keynote speaker for this year's annual learning event. It's my pleasure to introduce Wanjira Maathai, who is the Vice President and Regional Director for Africa at WRI at the World Resources Institute. She formerly served as a co-chair of WRI's Global Restoration Council and is a senior advisor on the Global Restoration Initiative. She's currently chair of the Wangari Maathai Foundation and former chair of the Green Belt Movement in Kenya. She's an inspiring leader. We're so grateful to have her here today, with over 20 years of experience advocating for social and environmental change in local and international contexts. Wanjira is on the board of the World Agroforestry Center. And also has been named as one of the 100 most influential African women in 2018 and 2020. So thank you for your leadership and your inspiration. We look forward to hearing your address.
Thank you, Lisa. That's a lot, but most important, my name is Wanjira, and I'm the Vice President and Regional Director for Africa at the World Resources Institute. And really thank you very much, Lisa and Mercy Corps, AgriFin team, for pulling together yet another inspiring and important learning event for everyone. I really enjoyed those remarks from Bill Gates and your presentation, Stuart. I mean, just incredibly inspiring, the potential. I'm really delighted that you are spending this much time and effort and investing so much in learning about the climate solutions that are applicable specifically to small-scale farmers and particularly even to climate solutions. Because here's the thing, among all the good work we will do ahead of us is in this critical decade of action, certainly in Africa and even beyond, restoring and even investing in the dignity of the most marginalized and excluded in our societies. These are the women you're talking about, youth, and those who are really the most economically disadvantaged. In the end, their success will be our greatest achievement. And so this level of investment is so warranted, so inspiring. Many on my team know that I'm passionate about catalyzing rural prosperity in Africa and the agricultural sector, the food systems transformation, because it really does present some of the most compelling opportunities for transforming our continent, certainly transforming the lives of so many. I'm always struck by the data from the World Resources Institute and also from the Food and Agriculture Organization that always makes it clear why this is so important. 80% of the food consumed in all non-industrialized countries is produced by small-scale farmers. Imagine that. And 70% of them are women. Bill Gates is right. When small farms fail, whole economies fail. Because unlocking those opportunities across the agricultural value chain and food systems so that small-scale farmers have a fair shot at participating and winning in this game will be the biggest achievement we can make. And we have great opportunities. We have the Continental Free Trade Agreement that has now come into force to facilitate and catalyze intra-Africa trade. Imagine the opportunities therein for small-scale farmers to participate and engage in intra-Africa trade. I just dream of seeing our measly 15% of intra-Africa trade, 15% of the trade that goes on the African continent is within African countries. The rest is outside of Africa. We've got to up that number. In Europe, that number is 80%. In Asia, it's 60%. This will unlock that, and that makes me very excited. So all that to say that I'm delighted to be here. And over the past few days, I know you've heard a lot about some of the incredible innovations and learnings in this digital space. While we have learned a lot, we still have to look forward and anticipate what the ever-changing climate holds in terms of impacts, especially in regions where is so many, most so vulnerable and yet so under-resourced. The injustice therein is always so striking. A very recently released study suggested that despite the important agricultural investments to feed the world in the last 60 years, global farming productivity is still 21% lower than it could have been without climate change. That's significant. And it's equivalent to losing about 7 years of farm productivity increases since the 1960s. So the historical impacts of climate change have been more intense, and there's definitely getting worse, especially in large parts of Africa. So climate change has and will continue to drastically impact lives, livelihoods, landscapes of rural Africa. And many of the food systems, as I said earlier, are reliant on vulnerable rain-fed crop production, which will face increasing droughts and floods, as well as shifting seasons. So intensifying, as climate change intensifies, crop yields diminish, major crops like rice, maize, wheat, vital for food security, face very dark futures. And as we know, without accelerating adaptation, rural Africa will face an uphill battle. Those images that we've just seen are absolutely haunting. We cannot possibly allow that. What they face and what we face is increased water insecurity. WRI has the Aqueduct tool that assesses water risk and shows that 20% of African countries will experience high to extremely high water stress by 2040. Is absolutely no way we can survive with that. And this is given no adaptation action. So we have to act. Increasing fragmented landscapes will continue. We have shifts in agroecologies, and crop and livestock suitability will continue to disrupt agricultural livelihoods. And remember the impact of food supply that I talked earlier, the encroachment on natural habitats. So landscapes will continue and agricultural opportunities will continue to shrink. We'll have continued livelihood and land abandonment. It has to be extremely frustrating not to have the sort of predictability in agriculture that farmers have always enjoyed. They know exactly when to plant, when to harvest, when the rain is coming, even sometimes by the way the leaves look on trees. So farmers are now increasingly abandoning crop cultivation due to persistent crop failure and prolonged droughts. We also have increased food insecurity, you know that. And of course, FAO's recent report showed a clear connection between food insecurity and climate change. There will be increased conflict and political crisis. We're already seeing that in so many parts of Africa, because we know that the environmental degradation is directly related to the presence of peace. And when that is absent, people will fight for natural resources. We're seeing more and more evidence of this exacerbating and causing conflict. Look at Sudan, the conflict in Lake Chad Basin and most of Tigray today that is now increasing temperatures and droughts and famine, which will very quickly turn into drought. So the question is really, given these current projected impacts, how do we build an equitable, sustainable future for all? So at WRI, we're addressing these climate vulnerabilities and impacts in rural Africa by focusing on three main levers. The first one, looking at climate finance for vulnerable countries and seeing what role we can play to catalyze the movement of finance. It can help combat rural poverty and of course build resilience. Investing $250 to $500 per hectare in improving dryland farming practices can increase cereal yields by up to 140%. We can also integrate climate risks into policy and investment. We actually have to. And of course, some of WRI's analysis have shown that less than a third of the countries included resilience in their COVID-19 stimulus packages. That is impossible to imagine because economies will recover only if we can include resilience in it. And this clearly underscores the importance of improving the central ministry's understanding of climate risks and planning and adaptation benefits. And the reason we're so much investing now in engagement with government and in communications with government to ensure that the evidence and the data that's needed is at their fingertips. We also need to accelerate investment in locally led adaptation. At the Climate Adaptation Summit that was held in January, I know many of you were there, over 40 organizations committed to the principles of locally led adaptation. So important for building local capacity, for devolving decision-making and financial investment to effective levels so that communities can actually manage and make decisions about where to invest and why. Addressing structural inequities and inequalities in rural communities. So we're particularly encouraged by the efforts we're seeing in some of the pilot projects in locally led adaptation in Kenya in several counties. And we're anxious to see this scaled up. It has to be scaled up. We've got to double up our efforts in locally led adaptation. And you might ask, how does all this relate to digital solutions and the digital ecosystem? Well, it does, because we know that part of the resilience building solution toolkit has to be digital technology. We know how savvy farmers are today in using digital technology for all manner of solutions. They'll be important in leveraging climate financial technologies, integrating climate risk into policy and plans. And then, of course, as I said, accelerating locally led adaptation. As you've seen this week, these services are important. They're crucial for providing the information and access to resources for small-scale farmers to build their resilience. And also, I must add, to ensure that they can actually participate effectively in the value chain and then rebuild after the number of climate disasters that they continue to face. So it's a rapidly growing space, but this field is still marked with a lot of fragmentation and sustainable business models and the inability to effectively and sustainably reach the last mile. So this is something we have to change. And in the Global Commission on Adaptation, soon to be released blueprint for digital climate-informed advisory services, we at WRI and other partners will highlight the need to improve the digital solutions ecosystem and how we exactly will do that. So one of the key messages will really be we need to strengthen a learning community of practice, much like the one gathered here today. So to rapidly integrate climate resilience into agricultural digital solutions. It will take new partnerships, it will take new evidence for resilience and benefits, and it will take new collaborations. We actually have no choice but to accelerate adaptation and resilience building. I believe that wholeheartedly, and the digital solutions will be part of that, a big part of that. So as WRI and all of us ride this wave of momentum in the wake of the Global Commission on Adaptation, we hope, and I hope, that many of you will join us and feel the urgency that we all do and recognize that the opportunity to build climate resilience in digital and build in the digital agricultural ecosystem is now. And as so many others have said before me, let's turn this moment into a movement. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those amazing words, Wanjira. We know in our climate strategy that the solution is going to be in local communities. It's going to be in contextualizing the response, in reaching millions of people and empowering them to make the changes that they have to make and to get the investment that they have to have. We believe that the digital channels that Africa has been building for the last 10 years can be an accelerator for all of this. And I know at AgriFin, as we think forward into new partnerships and new products, we really do look to WRI as a major partner and a leader in this field. And we hope to support what you're doing and help it to scale scale to smallholder farmers. Thank you. And with these wonderful keynote addresses, we'll go ahead and we'll move on into our panel discussion. And I'd like to introduce two members of my team who are at the center of what we're doing on climate. Victoria Klaus, who is our agriculture and technology advisor, who's joining our new climate team. who has 10 years of experience working in tech innovation and agriculture and emerging markets. She's worked with mobile network operators and great players like the GSMA, M-KOPA, Caribou Digital, and Mr. Green Africa. She's been working with us really kind of at the forefront of trying to make climate solutions scale into the ecosystem that we've been building to more than 16 million farmers in the last 6 years. So thank you, Victoria, for joining as one of our panel moderators. And then I'll introduce my deputy director, Siaka Gatabaki, who's been with the program for the last 6 years, bringing his digital vision and his amazing ability to move partnerships and move markets, and a great background in technology and financial inclusion, and a passion for making all of this work. So I'll turn it over to Siaka and Victoria to lead us through our expert panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. I think you forgot the chief disruptor at the AgriFin team.
Yes, absolutely.
And noisemaker. But thanks for that great introduction. And to the audience, welcome to this panel discussion. The keynote addresses were amazing. I think they were really on point. We really have to think deeply about how we're going to avoid a climate disaster. I think Bill Gates put it well. In traditional times in Africa, we had these powerful men and women who were called rainmakers, you know, and they would be able to dangle their bells around and do something and it would rain, you know, and they could change the weather. But unfortunately, we don't have that now. But for this panel, we do have very powerful individuals. And I'd like to take a few seconds to just introduce the panelists that we have before us. And as part of the run-up show, we have a couple of questions that myself and Victoria shall get into. And then if there's time, we'll be able to then pick a few questions from the audience that you'd like to address to this distinguished panelists. So without further ado, I'll ask the panelists to turn on their cameras. And first we have Boniface Okuku, who's the director of ICT at Calro. We all know him. He's been part of us for quite a while in this ALE. So thank you, Boniface, for the time that you have sacrificed to be here. He's also the chair of committee on data at the International Council of Science. And then secondly, we have Dr., and he said not to call him doctor, but Dr. Bradley D. Dawn. I hope I pronounced that well. And he's the program manager at NASA Applied Sciences, Water Resources and Agricultural Research. Hi, Dr. Bradley. Next, we have Samir Ibrahim. And he's the CEO and co-founder of Sun Culture. We all know him and love him. Followed by Andrew Lala, who's the Chief Strategy Officer at Ignition. And then we have Ranveer Chandra. Can I say Ranveer? Ah, there you go. I didn't see you earlier on. Ranveer Chandra works at Microsoft FarmBeats. He's the Chief Scientist of Azure Global at Microsoft. Followed by that, we have Georgina Campbell-Flatter. She's the Director of Business Development for Emerging Markets at Tomorrow Now. And last but not least, and definitely not least, because this is all about the money, we have Tamer El Ragi, and I hope I pronounced that well. He's the Managing Director at Acumen Capital Partners. So we have the 7 distinguished guests. We have prepared a couple of questions for you. And perhaps maybe I should start with Samir. Hopefully we can give you enough time to probably give us a good spiel on this question. So to make it easy for you, we know that Sun Culture is a leader in climate technology. Maybe you could share with us why that is the case. What is the importance of the work that Sun Culture does? And also, how does the innovation that you are exporting into the continent, how does that translate into impacting climate change positively? And what kind of partnerships do you think you will require to support a rapid scale? Over to you, Samir.
Thanks, Siaka, and I love you too. Thank you for having me with such an amazing group of people. It's really interesting. I think small farmers and emerging markets play a bigger role in combating the climate crisis than many think. Not many on this call, but many outside this call. And Wanjira just mentioned some of this, but the narrative that plays in my head every day is that because most small farmers rely on the rain for their livelihood to grow crops and keep animals, And because climate change is making the already unpredictable and unreliable rains more unpredictable and more unreliable, small farmers are getting pushed further and further into poverty. So to make money, many farmers, for example, resort to cutting down our forests to make charcoal to sell, or they move to big cities in hopes of finding a job. Cutting down forests adds to climate change, and moving to big cities, or also called mass urbanization or climate migration, lowers our ability to feed the rest of the world. It creates slums and it threatens security. In the past decade, several countries have experienced regime change or armed conflict due in part to food-related unrest. Haiti, Madagascar, Egypt, Syria are just some examples. So I view our work as sitting in the middle of this sort of three-circle Venn diagram. You have climate change, food security, and rural poverty reduction. And while there are no silver bullets in life, at the center of all three of these circles are small farmers. So when we started Sun Culture, we said that if we can figure out how to improve and protect the productivity of small farmers, we can lift an entire group of people out of poverty, help them become more resilient to climate change, reduce climate migration, increase national security, save our forests, and grow enough food to feed the world, but they're all interconnected, right? So because small farmers require water to make money, to grow crops and keep animals, we decided that solar irrigation was a good place to start. So we became Africa's first solar irrigation company, and now we're the largest distributor of solar water pumps for farmers in Africa. We combine distributed solar technology with services and financing to help our customers increase their incomes by over 5 times and save an average of 17 hours a week fetching water. And Siaka, you'll like this. Our system is actually called the Rainmaker. And it's working. When 90% of farmers in Kenya reported being in a worse financial position in the second half of last year, over 80% of our farmers increased their incomes. 95% reported improving their quality of lives. So the question now is, how do we scale this? And you asked about partnerships. So there are 2 partnerships that don't currently exist that will scale this impact: government partnerships and a specific type of donor partnership. So for government partnerships, we need to remove the newly added VAT and duties on solar irrigation in Kenya. Removing taxes on our system will reduce our price by 26%, increasing our addressable market by 150%. We will not only help electrify Kenya, we will help the country reach one of its big 4 pillars, which is food security. So if there's anyone with influence in Kenya on the call, there may be a window with the Green Fiscal Incentives Program to include some tax removal in the 2021 finance bill. If not, we need to prioritize this for 2022. And then for donor partnerships, we need to think about subsidies. Subsidies have always been part of reaching rural populations with new technologies. We recently partnered with the Togolese government to roll out Africa's first commercial solar irrigation subsidy program. This is funded by other governments looking to support the Build Back Greener sort of theme in Africa. So we need fewer $100,000 or even $1 million grants, which are helpful, but we need more $100 million grants going towards fully implementing and scaling these types of interventions, similar to what the MacArthur Foundation does. This will certainly create systemic change in these sectors. So for funders and policymakers on the call, it's quite simple. To create food sovereignty, reduce conflict, reduce climate migration, save our forests, reduce poverty in Africa, we really need taxes and duties removed on these types of technologies, and we need funding to support the scale of solar irrigation subsidies. These measures will help everyone, governments, donors, farmers, private sector, reach all of our ambitious goals. Thanks for the time, Siaka.
Thanks so much for that, Samir. I think building on what you've just shared about the role of government there, providing these incentives, I'd like to direct the next question to Boniface Akuku. So Boniface, what is the role of government in making the climate transition viable for smallholder farmers? And specifically, how can government institutions like CalRO play a role in making data that's relevant for climate smart agriculture more effective for farmer-facing organizations such as Sun Culture?
Thank you, Victoria, and everyone else. I want to congratulate the people who spoke before us. Quite interesting. Yeah, so I would say that the role of government should be an enabler. I think when the government can take their role as an enabler, then the government will play a very big role in transitioning climate effects positively to the smallholder farmers. Now, the government should be able basically to enable in terms of policy environment. And I think in Kenya, we have, as a Ministry of Agriculture, we have a digital transformation strategy, which basically gives that environment. We also have the Data Protection Act and Bill, which again also gives that environment. And if that happens effectively, then the cost will go down and the value will go up, particularly for the rural and the underserved community where most of the smallholder farmers live. And the next thing that the role of government should be to provide investment. And I think the challenge has been, we've actually been focusing on crisis response, where we look for humanitarian aids, donor support. But what we need is the government need to be more proactive and have what I would call proactive response instead of just crisis response. And when the government can move their role to more from a crisis to proactive response, then they will enable support in terms of digitization, and particularly when coming to how does an organization like CALRO, where I sit, provide data which can support Sun Culture and the rest that are in this team are not here, is to provide a strategy and a roadmap. Because when there is confusion, you don't know where to turn to. So without a strategy and a roadmap, there will be chaos in the sector. And therefore, one of the things we have done in CALRO is to come up with a digital strategy and roadmap that basically brings order. And once there's order, and remove barriers to access to data, you actually enable private sector. Currently, we have about 14 private sector that we're working with, where we're actually providing an environment which they can access data. And once they can access data openly, then we can accelerate innovation. When we accelerate innovation, we are able to address the pain points of the farmers. And secondly, we also need an environment that allows disruption, because we must disrupt agriculture if we are to address the issue of climate change. And therefore, for us to be able to have disruptive technologies, then we must also provide an environment that enable access and accelerate innovation around data. And lastly, when we enable environment, which now allows private sector to come in, access the data, innovate around it, disrupt the agricultural system, will then lastly be able to provide agricultural intelligence. And for the world to receive or to attain the 70% food requirement by 2050, the issue of artificial intelligence, the issue of agricultural intelligence, machine learning, big data cannot be missed. And therefore, one of the things we have done is we have actually established a big data platform, which now again allows private sector to come in and access data which they need, and which can now allow them to build products and services, build technologies, tools, and applications, both at farm level, at the national level, and even at private personal level. So I think those are the areas I would say. Thank you, Victoria.
Thanks a lot, Boniface. I'm taking over from Victoria, and I'll probably just quickly shoot over to Ranveer. Boniface has just mentioned data. He's just mentioned artificial intelligence and machine learning. In fact, Victoria ran a great session on data and its impact in terms of making organizations be more strategic at the decisions they're making. From where you sit at Microsoft, what you see is that what is the impact? What's in store for us in terms of data, machine learning, and artificial intelligence? And how can this actually impact farmers' resilience or climate change resilience?
Yeah, hi Seika. I really liked all the talks until now, and congratulations on such an awesome event. So as you know, we at Microsoft have been working on bringing cloud, bringing AI, bringing all the latest in technology to agriculture for the last about 6 years. And as part of that, I started this program called Farm Beats, which was about data-driven agriculture, which which we've seen quite a bit of adoption in the developed world. We've seen adoption we've announced partnerships with companies like Land O'Lakes and others, where in the developed world, in places like the US and Europe, we are seeing more adoption. It's FarmBeats, for people who don't know, it's a cloud platform for ag tech companies to build their solutions for digital agriculture. And as you've heard, and Stuart pointed out too, and others as well, that artificial intelligence, this is a buzzword we hear a lot, it uses data to come up with predictions, to come up with what's going to happen in the future. And it has been shown to have lots of applications in agriculture. Some of the scenarios that we work with partners on include things like detecting crop stress, predicting future weather, yields, what the yield is going to be, what the outcomes are going to be. It even, for example, to convey these digital advisories to small-scale producers, it provides, for example, a natural language and voice interface using AI, using conversational AI. And which is starting, some of it, we know the potential, there have been papers written on it, and we need more adoption of these technologies to truly democratize some of these digital solutions we talk about, and to help some of the issues around around climate change. However, that said, AI still needs more work. Things like some of the challenges that we face, especially when working with small-scale producers. One is on low resolution of satellite data. These small farms, they are just a few hectares or less. And we get very few pixels of satellite data per farm. And even when we do that, a lot of these farmers, they practice subsistence farming. So in the same farm, they could be planting multiple crops. What that means is that you're not getting enough signal to extract this information to build your AI models. The third challenge with AI is that on sparse data, that is, we don't get a lot of good label data from small farms. And that is where satellite data is limited, the sensor, both limited in terms of time and spatial resolution. The sensors are sparse, there are not as many sensors. Even the voice data that we talked about, the language data is only available for the common languages. So how do you build artificial intelligence models on sparse data? And finally, the other challenges around how do you start making accurate weather forecasts, which are available for the developed world, but for a lot of the emerging markets, we don't have very good localized forecasts. If you could do localized forecasts with low-cost sensors, it can enable these small-scale producers to adapt to climate change, to be more resilient, because these can address some of the problems that all the previous speakers, including Vanjira, Samir, and others talked about. So that said, with AI, what we are seeing is there is a lot of potential. We are seeing it realized of how AI can bring a lot of transformation to agriculture in the developed world. And it is upon us to start building more technologies to get the benefits of this to small-scale farmers, so to these small-scale producers, so they can benefit with all the benefits of data, with predictions about what's happening where in the farm, what's going to happen a few days in the future, so that they can then take the decisions that can make them better equipped to handle all the things around climate change. So just to conclude, I wanted to say one thing is that even when I started FarmBeats, I went and interviewed several growers worldwide, most of them in the US, but worldwide. What I realized is that farmers know a lot about their farm, about their piece of land. They are the experts. Some farmers, they can feel the soil and say what's going on. Some farmers taste the soil. Yet a lot of decisions they make is based on guesswork, like when to plant, when to harvest, when to water. It's all based on guesswork. If we can supplement, if we can augment a farmer's knowledge with data and data-driven insights using AI, we can then equip them to take much better decisions to handle all the vagaries that will come with climate change.
Thanks, Ranveer. Really interesting to note some of those challenges you've raised about AI. And I think on your point about accurate weather forecasts, I think two of our panelists will be happy to contribute on that point. I'd like to now turn to Brad Dawn from NASA. Brad, a question for you. What do you think are the game-changing information assets that NASA can bring to the climate change for agriculture sector, particularly in Africa? Thanks, Brad.
Oh, thank you. It's a real honor to be here. This is really, really interesting discussion. I'll start with what NASA does best. You've probably seen us put helicopters on Mars. We do stuff in space really, really well. That's what we're designed to do, what NASA does. And we continue to produce a lot of data. And we will over the past 5 years and now into the next few. There's a lot of focus, obviously, on climate change. I think one of the key things is the freshwater interface. And I think this gets to a lot of the discussion that we've had about how do we do predictive interventions? How do we do assessments of the availability and options that you might have? A really neat discussion on irrigation. That we know that's going to be one of the solutions to for climate resilience. The question then is, how much can we irrigate? How do you know how much to irrigate? And so we're doing a lot more with soil moisture. We have a keen focus on soil moisture that's going to grow to the point of getting 200-meter resolution observations in the next, in 2023. We'll launch a satellite, so globally 200-meter resolution soil moisture observations. So moving forward in this sort of aspect of closing the loop on the water cycle, the question then comes, because we're integrating active sensors, a lot of data, way more data than we've ever had by magnitudes, even at NASA, who's the world's largest producer and archiver of Earth observation data. How do you handle that data? And our last speaker talked about AI. AI will have to be a solution. I think we'll have the data. I think we have now some historical data. It's systematic. It's open to the public, something I'm really proud at NASA. I know they talk a lot about astronauts, but I think one of the best things NASA's done for the world is this open data policy where everyone gets it. It's available to everybody. We don't make it as easy as we should, and we're working on that. And I think that's the next point. Some of the initiatives that we're leaning forward on aren't just the space architecture. It is archiving our data in the cloud and having access through the cloud. It's data integration. We know there's very few single satellite solutions. There's many of you here that probably have grown up like I did with Landsat. That was the satellite. Well, it's exploding, and we need it to explode because we need these multi-sensor solutions that include soil moisture, that include microwave, that include precipitation, as well as predictive capabilities from our climate models. So, and this is occurring to the point where we're trying to get better and better in-season forecasts. And one of the next challenges we then have is how do we transfer this to users? Let me go back and repeat myself. NASA is a space agency. We are not designed to transfer this data to end users, and in particular small farmers and small farm holders in Africa. We've been supporting work in Africa for decades, but we rely on groups like this, like AgriFin, the Gates Foundation, WRI, all these groups to really help us understand how to get our data in such a way that users can use the data. What's the format? What's the type of data? What's the frequency? So one of the big innovations at NASA, the game changers, is that recognition and acknowledgement, and that's now being manifested in things like NASA Harvest, where we're going outside and saying, develop a consortia that can take this data and work innovatively with partners, whether it's Microsoft, whether it's AgriFin, Land O'Lakes, Big Ag, Small Ag, NGOs, to understand how we get this data into solutions. And that's working. We've developed solutions at the national level, and the hopes is that will then start going down to the farm holder. And lastly, I'd like to focus on one key aspect is none of this will work without local ownership. I've been doing this now for 3 decades, and I don't know a sustainable solution that isn't owned, trusted by the end user. And that includes the ground data. We do need to really work on that ground data. So just like was talked about earlier, the data that's needed for the smallholder, the ground information is critical to enable these satellite observations. And that's that trust relationship. And I actually think it's good because the user takes ownership of the solution, and that's essential. NASA should be in the background. When I see a solution that has NASA in the footnote and not up on top, I say we've won. They don't need NASA to be on the top. And so that's what we're really working for. And I look forward to working with you through these partnership programs and also through our consortia. And I'd love to follow up with anybody and everybody on some of these solutions. It's an exciting time. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Bradley. I was actually going to ask a question to all the panelists, like who would you, out of all the panelists, which are the top 3 people that you'd like to have a follow-up conversation with? So that's great. Let me move over to Andrew and Ignitia. Andrew, Bradley's just mentioned a lot of the work that NASA does in space. And I know that you guys are doing a lot of the work here on, is it Terra Firma, on Earth? Maybe you'd like to share with us a little bit about what Ignitia is all about, how you guys have innovated around the service that you're delivering, and what are some of the key lessons you've learned through the work that you've been doing?
Yeah, thank you for that introduction, and thank you, NASA, for your data. We're one of your data users. So we pull from a whole host of remote sensing satellite-driven data. We combine it with our machine learning. So Ranveer, you'll be happy to know that we've been using AI and machine learning to improve our accuracy for tropical weather forecasts. Basically, I mean, we're in good company. Wanjira said farmers know how to farm. And that's exactly right. The challenge is that climate change is upending that. Climate change is changing the growing periods, the crop appropriateness, the temperature, providing erratic rainfall, and of course, the more extreme weather events that we see. Farmers need access to better information, better forecasts, but then also this type of advisory service. And basically, we think of the service we provide in 2 parts. And I think, Stuart, the slide you had on innovation really resonates with us. The first is around the product innovation. So Ignitia was founded with the idea that global weather forecast models have largely failed the tropical belt, where in West Africa, we did our pilot with the 10,000 Nigerian farmers, and currently where our 1.5 million subscribers access our forecasts. That's because they're based on convection, totally different set of physics that the temperate zones and the global models haven't really mastered yet. So when we think about the product innovation, we know we have to build trust with farmers, which means offering a superior forecast accuracy to anything else that they can access on their phone or through a radio station or any other channel. So last year, our model outperformed IBM and GFS's global weather model. And with new machine learning techniques, we only anticipate that our accuracy will increase from there. That's the first key element to building trust with farmers. Have a forecast that is well better than chance with climatology and historic predictions, and something that aligns with the right timing where a farmer makes decisions. So you have kind of hourly forecasts, really good for flash floods, things like that. But farmers want to know seasonally what type of seed to plant, if it's going to be worth it for them to invest in a drought-tolerant seed if they're going to be anticipating drier than normal conditions that year. So seasonal outlooks we see as being critically important. It's something we provide over our SMS channels. The second is farmers are making decisions on a daily basis, but also about a week out. So how can we drive forecast accuracy in that time scale that allows the farmer to make those decisions, seasonal outlooks for crop selection and understanding the growing periods, but then the more immediate decisions of when to plant, when to fertilize, when to harvest, when to hire labor, so they don't have Labor Day payouts, or make sure that all of those investments that they're making in crop inputs are applied at the optimal time so that it has the maximum yield boosting effect as intended, and they can mitigate a lot of these weather-related risks if, for example, there's elements of heat stress or other weather-related risks. So I think the second, in addition to the product innovation where you really have to get the accuracy right and demonstrate that value to the farmer, it's reaching that farmer where he or she is currently. And so for us, that's why the start was the telecommunication company partnerships, where by being a value-added service provider to Airtel, MTN, Orange, any farmer with a phone can type in a USSD code. We have location information as a result of those partnerships, and we can deliver those hyper-local forecasts down to the resolution of 9 kilometers. We've done downscaling to 3 kilometers, some tests, but we can get into debates over what the right resolution would be for tropical storm systems. But that process innovation is really important because we know that even if farmers are accessing it over SMS today, what types of WhatsApp and smartphone app solutions we need to develop in the future. And so that's where we're looking at these bundled services through different farmer touch points. Maybe there's a supply chain partner is doing traceability and they have their own platform. Maybe they want to bundle weather services to that platform. Great. Then it's a business model integration where we're working with that platform to add weather services so their farmers or suppliers can improve their good agricultural practices and anticipate some of those changes to the growing season, whether it's erratic rainfall or changes to temperature where maybe heat stress is of importance, heat stress and drought leading to aflatoxin, if you're talking about staples. So I think for us, the farmer journey starts with the farmer and listening to them. Where are they now? What information do they need to make a better decision on his or her own farm? And addressing those real pain points. And I think the more challenging element for us certainly is, great, you have these telecommunication company partnerships, but in terms of regulation, I think Samir was talking about this, what kind of incentive does the telecommunication company have to provide services to an underserved market that has a regular cash flow? It's really challenging reaching a lot of smallholder farmers when they could be generating revenues as a telecommunication company just as much by providing, ringtones or something that doesn't generate an impact. The other part is just how fragmented agriculture is in some of these markets and how challenging it is to find a sustainable and scalable business model approach. So that's why we're looking at these platforms and why we're looking at bundling with other service providers so that improved weather forecasts is something that underpins all of those other agricultural investments and services to farmers, whether it's improved weather information and insights to get the risk premium right for agricultural lending, or if it's to help a fertilizer company ensure that the use of that fertilizer is at the optimal time over the course of the week so that it has that maximum effect and doesn't contribute to agrochemical runoff or overuse, as you see in some supply chains. So we believe this kind of weather information and advisories is one of the critical ingredients to building farmer resilience, both at the longer term seasonal stages where there's different actions being made by the farmer, or decisions being taken by the farmer, or more of the day-to-day and weekly decisions that they're making on their farm.
Yeah, Andrew, thank you so much. I just want to note to the audience that if you do have questions for the panel, please post them in the public chat box on the portal, and our panelists, when they're not speaking, may be able to address some of the questions directly. We're a little short on time today. Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Really good to hear those insights on how you're building trust with farmers. I think now turning to another really exciting organization working on weather intelligence, Tomorrow Now. Georgina, with a changing climate, accurate weather forecasts with decisioning tools become ever more critical. How is Tomorrow Now, how do you view this challenge, and what are some of the technology innovations that will enable better weather information? Thanks, Georgie.
Thank you, Victoria, and good afternoon. Pleasure to be here. I'm filled with hope, actually, with for the future after hearing my fellow panelists. As Victoria mentioned, my name is Georgina. I lead tomorrownow.org. So we're a nonprofit that recently spun out of global weather intelligence company Tomorrow.io, formerly Climacell. And we're essentially the public good vehicle for our software. So we exist to help vulnerable communities adapt to the changes in climate that are happening now. And you're absolutely right. Accurate forecasts, or more specifically to build on Andrew's comments, what we would describe as location-based on-time forecasts are really becoming an essential part of the digital toolkit, right? For businesses, governments, individuals, and especially for operational decision-making for farmers. And even with a changing climate, we believe a lot can be done to mitigate climate risk with the knowledge of what's going to happen tomorrow, right? A farmer can avoid a flooding disaster by clearing the leaves from her gutters, right, in time for a large storm, or harvest and transport her tea leaves today versus tomorrow to avoid getting stuck, right? But we also look at climate action through the lens of empowerment and competitiveness, right? So boosting yields through better water and pest management. Again, Andrew mentioned this, turning locusts into animal feed, right? Helping insurance companies better forecast risk in a changing climate. That to us is empowerment. It's giving the farmers the opportunity to lift themselves out of poverty. And again, accessible on-time weather is absolutely critical for this, right? So, and we have learned the value of on-time through hundreds of use cases, and two quick examples that aren't agriculture related, but I think they're still relevant. So IndiGrid, one of India's largest utilities, before cyclone Amphan that hit in 2020, Tomorrow was able to help ground operations staff determine 10 hours before the storm, the exact 3 out of the 400 towers that were at risk. They pre-positioned crew members at those sites, there was a plan in place, and they avoided blackouts for millions of people. Uber, we learned together during a recent Uber Eats POC that we can increase their orders by 12% through weather-triggered push notifications, right? It will be raining in your neighborhood this evening, order in. And again, what matters here is on-time alerts, location-based and tied to action. And I'll mention three innovations here that we're investing in here, as well as some of the panelists here, to enable this on-time climate action. One is upstream, right? The weather enterprise has made huge progress in recent decades, but the progress made has really been from a science push versus a use case pull perspective, right? So the on-time for who element has been missing. And this is changing actually, because the private sector is starting to innovate more further upstream to enable that downstream value for users. So for example, for us, to be useful for operational decision making for Tomorrow customers, we've had to build our own NWP, our numerical weather prediction model, right? And this is actually also what's motivating us to go into space. And we're starting with precipitation radar satellites. So rain is notoriously under-observed. More than 5 billion still live outside of radar coverage, right? There's no real practical ground solution for this, especially over the oceans, which is critical for monitoring storm initiation, right? So we asked ourselves, can we close this gap with space? And the answer is yes. The second innovation is downstream scalable SaaS. So together, we're talking about 500 million smallholds right now, right? 2.5 billion people, the supply chain, we're trying to serve. And the key for us has really been to provide easy to use SaaS where anyone can create and share custom alerts in minutes, right? And we've built a web-based platform, mobile app, API, all that can be leveraged easily by the average user, any industry. And of course, we need to build on a deep technology stack here. But what's important for us is that close feedback loop between the users and our 60-person R&D team, right? So because we're able to constantly iterate and improve. And finally, actually building on Stuart's last slide there about innovation, we believe that we really do need to innovate on public good vehicles. And this is why we founded our NGO, the organization that I lead. And this is to bridge the technology technology and impact. You know, the charitable purpose of an NGO is never questioned. The question for an NGO is always about sustainability and scale. And so with Tomorrow Now, we leverage tomorrow.io's technology for good, and we then build innovative partnerships to ensure that inclusive climate action. So, you know, I think what we can do is really bring that predictability back to the farmer with technology and partnership.
Thanks so much, Georgina. I didn't want to stop you. Actually, I would have let you go on for another 20 minutes. But yeah, it seems that we're really running out of time. And I'm sure that Lisa is vigorously taking all the notes so she can summarize some of the points from this panel discussion. But I'd like to go to our last panelist, and last but not least, probably the most important in some way or the other, because it's about money. And Tamar, perhaps maybe you could share with us some of your perspectives. We've Acumen been one of the few impact investors that actually have a dedicated climate smart agriculture fund. I mean, what lessons have you learned making investments in this sector? And what are some of the bottlenecks remaining to really resolve some of the challenges in the climate smart supply chain?
Sure. And you know, first of all, it's really an honor to be among such a fine group of panelists and be part of such an amazing event. I've learned a lot today and the previous days listening to fine speakers like yourselves. Well, yeah, of course, money is important, but I wouldn't say it's the most important thing. That's for sure. And first of all, our fund invests. I would like to say that our fund invests in African startups with business models that help smaller farmers become more resilient to climate change. So that's, resilient agriculture is the epicenter of the strategy of our fund. There are so many lessons that we have learned as a fund and as Acumen, generally speaking, over the past years. So the first one, mentioning money, the first one is catalytic capital is crucial. We cannot understate the catalytic funding or the role that the catalytic funding that we received from GCF played as our anchor investor to allow us to raise more money from the likes of FMO, Soros Economic Development Fund, the Children Investment Fund Foundation, and family offices in the US and Europe. We have also learned that climate resilience requires multifaceted approach. There is no silver bullet. We can't say we have found it yet. But we can say that it is not enough to provide farmers with hybrid seeds. Definitely they need hybrid seeds, but they need more. They also need access to financial services such as credit and insurance. They need access to information and technical support. Last but not least, they need access to markets. But to deliver that, one of the things that we learned is when it comes to money, again, back to money is, it takes more than one source of funding. We need blended financing. We need, we need access to catalytic funding. We need access to commercial funding, but we also need this funding to be long-term. We need to be flexible, and we need to combine it with grant funding, like Samir rightly mentioned, because that grant funding is a key. Like in our case, it's a key to support farmers training. It's a key to support ESG activities. Activities that early stage companies won't be able, even if they want to, they won't be able to support through their own P&L. We can share our own experience as a fund. We were able to raise $5 million in grants in the form of technical assistance facility. And that facility allows us to support our investee companies with activities that otherwise they wouldn't be able to, like farmers training, like capacity building, like business development activities. We also learned that platform models are essential for an impactful and financially stable business models. We've learned that we need businesses that provide farmers with more than one service or product. We need services that develop more than one service and product so that they can deliver impact while being sustainable, which sustainability and scalability is a key for any an investment that we make. So also another lesson that we learn over the years is measuring our impact is a key to measure our success, because we can always claim that we are impactful, but what does that mean? So we run a lot of surveys on the farmers that work with our investee companies. Over the past year, actually, even during COVID, about 80% of the farmers that work with our investee companies reported an increase in income, reporting increase in their yield, and reporting increase or improvement in the way they farm. And almost 90% reported an improvement in their quality of life. And that's a key, because at the end of the day, it's all about, the livelihood of those smaller farmers. We also learned that measuring impact has to be multifaceted. In addition to measuring their livelihood, or the improvement in their livelihood, we also collaborated with 60 Decibels to develop a climate resilience impact toolkit, where we can, measure the farmers' resilience on 3 dimensions. One, their ability to adapt; 2, access to enablers; and 3, their ability to absorb climate shocks. Yet we also learned that we all need to do more, a lot more. We need more awareness. We need more people to say that, hey, climate change is a fact of life. And while we are working to stop it, we need to support those who are affected the most. We need to, remind, ourselves that in a year like 2019, only 5% of the $600 billion invested in climate was spent on adaptation, and we need to do more. Also, last but not least, we learned that we need to raise awareness, yet show evidence that climate smart products and services mean economically resilient farmers, which leads to a resilient and sustainable businesses, which, a key to all of what we are doing, all of us. Thanks all, and again, nice to be with you guys.
Thanks a lot, Tema. That was brilliant. And then a brilliant close to this panel discussion. To the people in the audience, I do believe that we have had rainmakers here. And I'd really want to thank the panel for all the contributions that they have made to this discussion and to the ALE overall. There will be a few questions from the audience. Please, panelists, have time to answer those questions in the chat box, so that at least they can get a feel. This might be the only opportunity they might have to talk to you now, but we'll sure try and keep connecting them to you with any relevant questions. I'll quickly hand over to Lisa to summarize this discussion and move us on in the agenda. Thank you.
I thank you, Sieka. I don't even want to try to summarize this conversation. It's been so beautiful, and I would just quote. I would just repeat what Georgina said. After listening to this panel, I'm filled with hope. So thank you. I think through our keynote speakers and this panel, I think AgriFin has found a North Star of the types of organizations we need to be bringing into partnerships, and the scale of the change that we need to make. And we're committed to working side by side with all of these actors and our ecosystem. To close us down, or to bring us to a close, I'd like to ask Stefan Wilhelm very quickly to make our last recognition awards. We're so thrilled to have the Bayer Foundation join our consortium of funders as AgriFin moves into the next 4 years. And Stefan is a social entrepreneur in his own right, but also leading the social innovation work at the Bayer Foundation, both in agriculture and in health. So Stefan, why don't you go ahead and make our last announcements, and then I will make our last thank yous.
Thank you very much. And just maybe to highlight how thrilled I am to be here, and how I think hope is the word that you use, Lisa, how much hope and excitement it generates amongst all of us to see that I see here that we can really make a change, and we can really make it happen. And even though we're short on time, I just want to thank everyone for their contributions, and also for us being able to be part of this journey toward the future, hopefully with other partners like you. And now Bayer Foundation is going to partner with AgriFin for at least least the next 4 years. And one of the reasons why we're doing this is actually present. So Andrew from Ignitia was talking about what they do and how they do it, and the pilot in Nigeria with the 10,000 farmers. And that, for example, is one of the reasons why Ignitia is one of the recipients of the award for climate smart farming and advisory, because helping farmers improve farm practice through data-driven ag services at scale and at depth is really what makes all the difference. And Ignitia, as the first one, provides hyperlocal weather information, as we learned, which is fascinating, I think. And building on that, AWARE, the second recipient of the award, provides crop analytics and supports smallholder farmers in making climate smart decisions. And in both the public and the private sector as a partnership generator. And finally, Acre Africa helps mitigate climate risks through crop insurance, for example, and advisory services. And for all of these reasons, I'm very happy to hand over those 3 awards in the name of AgriFin. So back to you, Lisa.
Thank you, Stefan. I'll go ahead and respect everyone's time. Thank you for staying with the session, but I have to say a huge thank you to our, starting my video. I have to say a huge thank you to our speakers, our panelists and moderators over the course of the last 4 days. We've been thrilled. You know, usually we do this all in one day, and it's been such a thrill to let the event unfold over the course of 4 days, and to hear so many great voices. I've learned so much myself. It's in work in this every day. But we would specifically like to thank UN Special Advocate Queen Maxima of the Netherlands, the CEO of Mercy Corps, Jada Doyen McKenna, and Tule Linnea from the Kenyan Agricultural Transformation Office from our opening panel, as well as Bill Gates and Stuart Collis from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and Wanjira Maathai from WRI as our incredible keynote speakers over the course of the event. And of course, along with Stuart, I just want to thank the donors who've been a part of this journey, the MasterCard Foundation, the Gates Foundation, now the Bayer Foundation, but also GIZ, Cisco, Skoll, Rabobank, many of the funders who come in and just injected something when there was a particular need. So we're so grateful to the consortium of donors that's coming around this work. And we want to thank our partners, more than 150 strong, reaching so many more farmers than you do even with us. We applaud your effort and continue to be excited to support you. The conference attendees, there's been someone who manages this event was saying that they've never seen such active participation. Thank you for engaging and helping us lift the dialogue. Our conference team, Elena Holtkote and Abby Burrell and Lillian Yamongo, it's amazing what you guys have done in the last months. And thank you for all the vision and professionalism you brought to this. I want to thank the full AgriFin team, which is impossible to do here, but calling out our leaders of Siaka Gatabaki, Collins Marita, John Mundy, and now Elias Noure. So grateful to have this incredible team. Again, we're filled with hope. We want you to stay safe and stay strong, and we look forward to the next 4 years of building new partnerships, new models. I just last plug, all of this is on video, and many people are going to the website and seeing the videos. I just want to put in a special plug for the gender transformations session yesterday and the closing remarks of Vicki Wild from the Gates Foundation, which just brought cheers, across everyone who heard it. The 2 focal areas for AgriFin in the next 4 years are going to continue to be the gender transformational approach and climate change. The 2 of them are part and parcel of the same thing, and Vicki put it so well yesterday. So I encourage you guys to please get back on the website, see anything that you may have missed, and we are very, very grateful and looking forward to the next 4 years. Thank you.